Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to a live edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am your host, David Grubb. So we're going to talk about the Joe Dumars press conference today, preceding Media Day, which is a little bit unusual, not seen that setup before in covering the Pelicans. And also, I just quickly want to address kind of an elephant in the room. I was not at the press conference today. I will not be at Media Day tomorrow. And that is not by my choice. When I joined on with Boot Crew Media this summer, I did so as a partner between the Bird Rights and Boot Crew, and for me to be able to come here and do a podcast and discuss the Pelicans the way I do. We thought it was a good thing in order for me to get to a broader audience and for them to bring some journalistic qualities. And we talked about this one on my very first show about why this partnership I thought was good for the fans and good for me. And I think it was a win-win-win all around. Unfortunately, for their reasons, the New Orleans Pelicans have decided that I cannot be credentialed because of my association with Boot Crew. I think that's a decision that ultimately hurts the fans. I think that, I've committed myself over the past several years to being a good steward of information, of being a conduit between the organization and the fan base, and getting out legitimate analysis and providing consistent questioning of the organization and the players. I do that without malicious intent. I do that with, I believe, a degree of professionalism, and a high degree of professionalism. And I think I've earned the respect of coaches, players, and my fellow media members. It is unfortunate, in my opinion, that they have decided that, that the partnership is something that is a negative. And I think that it's ultimately a negative for you as consumers. I think we need multiple voices. I think we need people who hold the organization accountable. I think we need people who can speak directly to the organization. I think, we need to be able to see those things. We need to be able to have banter and ask difficult questions when they arise. And unfortunately, right now, it just doesn't seem like I'm going to get the opportunity to do that. So we shall see if something changes in the future. But as of right now, I will not be a credentialed member of the media. So let's go forward and discuss what did happen in today's press conference. And I think that when you look at these, the big thing that you're trying to find are some answers about the offseason. And Joe Dumars did provide a number of answers regarding player situations, regarding his expectations for the team this year, regarding his direction for the organization as a whole. I think he did provide some good answers. Also, you're looking for confidence. While that is a easy thing to have at the beginning of a season, before anybody's played a game, before anybody's gotten hurt, before any of these things really happen, but you want to see your executives project a sense of confidence, project a sense of authority and understanding and control over the situation. And I think if we're just looking at that as the criteria, then I think Joe Dumars, did a good job at that today. I think he projected as the leader of this organization. I think he projected as someone who has a distinct idea of what he wants to accomplish. I think he projected as someone who is going to have a direct impact on how this franchise is perceived nationally and locally. Those are all good things. I think the majority of what he discussed today, obviously you try to stay as positive as possible. So I think most of the things that came out of the questions today were good, positive answers. I think that they were a good benefit to the media and getting, and I thought the questions that were asked generally were very, very good. So the most important and most pressing things that we want to start with is just looking at the injury updates, and nobody is more important in that, in getting updates than Trey Murphy and Herb Jones. And a lot of positive information there. Joe Dumars revealed that those guys are going full speed, that they have been scrimmaging, that they've been knocked down, that they've fallen down, and they've done all those things, and that they should be fully cleared to go, at full speed during the preseason and building up towards the regular season. That's great news. That's fantastic news that both of those guys who will likely be starters, I guess if you're depending on how Herb Jones, in this rotation goes, but I think Trey and Herb are both going to be starters. So you have those elements of your roster ready to go from day one. That's a huge benefit that the Pelicans really didn't have going into the preseason last year. You didn't really get to see the full squad together prior to the regular season. We never saw the starting five on the floor last season in the preseason before the season began. Going to shout out to Just A Davis in the chat. How you doing today? I hope you're doing well. But as I said, it's good news to find out that Trey and Herb will be ready to go, and that I expect, unlike last year, I expect the full five to be on the court together during the preseason, which I think is a huge thing when you have the kind of turnover. The fact that these guys, again, Zion, Herb, and Trey didn't play one game together last year. The three of them did not play a single game together. So having those guys ready to go with the change in responsibilities, with the change in play style that has to occur now, with Trey being a full-on part of the starting lineup, a guy who's going to be counted on as the second option for this team on a night-to-night basis. Having Trey ready to go and start assuming that role is important. When you talk about DeJounte Murray and Derek Queen, the two other injuries, they're both still rehabbing, according to Joe Dumars. The big thing for Derek Queen has been that they've gotten him working on his conditioning, gotten him on the exercise bike, trying to get his endurance up and to get him to stay in shape. And that's a huge thing for him. Conditioning was a concern for him coming into the league, and to see Derek Queen, taking to his commitment to keep his body ready while he rehabs his hand. And as Joe Dumars said, just because your hand doesn't work, it doesn't mean your legs don't. So you can get out there and you can run, you can ride the bike, you can do these things, and you can stay in shape. And that's going to be an important thing for him throughout his rookie season, is maintaining his shape and being at the peak of fitness. So, to have, to know that DeJounte and Derek Queen are deep into their rehab, according to Joe Dumars, that they are doing very well. Those are encouraging signs considering the significance of both of those injuries. When you look at this roster, I think what Joe Dumars said overall is the same thing we've been saying throughout the summer, is why he put this team together as he did and did not make some other changes that may have been on the table. He wants to see this team together on the court. He wants to see these pieces on the court together to see what this mix actually looks like before he does any kind of other additional major overhauls to this lineup. So when you look at Zion, Herb, Trey all being around this summer, and he said the majority of the time this offseason, 6 to 8 players have regularly been in the facility, both doing morning workouts and evening week workouts. He mentioned Herb, Trey, and Zion. He mentioned Jeremiah Fears. He mentioned Derek Queen. He mentioned some of the other guys. I'm sure Jose Alvarado, a guy who's has been notoriously a guy who hangs around the facility a lot. 6 to 8, and other guys working out at home. Kevon Looney has been in the facility. We know that. We know Jordan Poole has been in the facility. So if there's this mix of 6 to 8 guys, that's a good thing. You're building a lot of the things that, as Joe Dumars said, come organically. Your familiarity with other people only comes from being on the court together. And if they're there working out together, you build a personal relationship, which is important because you got to know the guy that you're playing and competing alongside. And then you also, as you get out on the court for these scrimmages, which there have been plenty, according to Joe Dumars, when you get on the court with these scrimmages, is now you're learning how guys want to play. Do you want the pass ahead of you? Do you want the pass high? Do you want the pass low? Where do you want your shots to come from? How do you run the paint? Run the court? All those types of things. When you're looking to figure out how players do these things in game situations, you got to play together. And Joe Dumars says this last month prior to camp has been huge for that, with these guys being in the building and working together. And, we've seen that before with this franchise. Before they went on the big run, going all the way back to Anthony Davis, that the year that they got to the second round prior to the season, there was a lot of joint workouts. The year before, the Pelicans really started to pick up the 49-win season, they would talk about workouts together in Los Angeles, all these types of things where they get together. There's supposed to be a workout this summer where these guys got together. So you see them trying to build these relationships, especially when you have high turnover. I think that that's really important for these guys to assemble in their off time, get together, and be the leaders of this. You can't expect the organization. The organization does what it's supposed to do by leaving the doors open. The doors of the facility stay open, and somebody's there to let you in. If you want to come in the morning, somebody's going to be there. If you want to be there late at night, somebody's going to be there for you to be able to get your work in. So the organization is doing its part in the offseason by creating an open sense of, if you want to be here, we're here for you. But it's up to the players to meet that. And I think the other major theme that Joe Dumars talked about today was responsibility and accountability. And that came up in his conversation primarily about Zion Williamson and what he wants for Zion Williamson and what Zion wants for himself. And Joe essentially said it's not enough to be talented, that there's a difference between being talented and great. And it's almost, he's speaking to the entire team through his conversations with Zion Williamson. He's speaking to the entire team because the Pelicans have been talented. The Pelicans have had players. The Pelicans have had, all-star players. They've had, there was a time very recently where the people talked about this as the deepest team in the NBA, but they've not had success. Not real success. Getting to the first round of playoffs is not success in the NBA. So how do they get real success? Players have to be responsible and accountable. Joe Dumars is actually correct. He's 100% accurate in saying there has to be responsibility and accountability, and that has to come from within. As much, and I'll say we had kind of a discussion about this on Propels Talk once, and it seemed like there was really an opposite side of this. And afterwards, I talked with some of the guys, and it was like, we're all arguing the same point, and we kind of were, in the sense that Willie Green, ultimately cannot be responsible for what happens to players on the court. And Joe Dumars talked about this with a number of guys, whether he was talking about Zion Williamson, whether he was talking about Trey Murphy, whether he was talking about Jeremiah Fears, whomever. Ultimately, it came down to him saying the players will determine what their futures are. They will determine what their seasons are like. They will determine how their careers are remembered. If Jeremiah Fears is going to play this season, it's because he's going to show that he's ready to play. If Zion Williamson is going to be the kind of player that leads this franchise to unprecedented heights, then he's got to show that on the floor. If Trey Murphy is going to be next, if he's going to be an all-star, if he's going to be that kind of player that lives up to the hype that he's getting around the league right now, then he's got to do that himself. And that's all true. It does start with the players and their level of accountability and responsibility for winning every day. And I think certainly you could argue very easily that this roster now has a greater sense of players who will compete for each other in some regard because of the bonds and the relationships that already existed between four of these guys, your Zion, your Trey, Herb, and Jose. There's a huge bond between those guys. You already have a strong bond between Kevon Looney and Jordan Poole. Those guys have come in bonded. Yves Missi comes in, he's going to come in and work hard and be a valuable part of this team. Jeremiah Fears, according to all reports, has shown an eagerness and a willingness to get better, to work hard, to want to assume the role of leadership. You have these guys who have put these high expectations on themselves. Fears wants to be one of the two greatest point guards, if not of his era, of all time. Those are high responsibility, high levels of expectations for yourself. That means you're going to have to put in a lot of work. Trey Murphy expects to be an all-star. That means he's going to have to put in the work. Zion Williamson expects to be one of the best players in the league. You got to put in the work. And for Joe to say that Zion has done all the work, we've seen it. We've seen at least the glimpses, whether it's him at UNO with Master P, whether it's him in the Pelicans facility, whether it's him, whatever. You've not heard the kind of things that we heard last season. You had the blip at the beginning of the offseason, and that will resolve itself however it does. But since then, we have not had any concerns about what Zion has been doing. He hasn't looked to gain any weight in this offseason. He looks like he's ready to play. The smile is still there. And I think that's an important step. And I think that what has happened is Zion Williamson finally feels a little comfortable with leadership. For whatever reasons. the reports were there from day one that Zion and David Griffin did not mesh well. It doesn't seem to be the case with Joe Dumars. And I think the difference, and again, I'm not going to stand over here and dance on David Griffin's grave. He's gone. It's no need to try to make him, to focus on what his negatives were. But I'm going to say in contrast with Joe Dumars, I think there is a language that is spoken between players. I think there's a language that is spoken between guys from small towns. And I think there's a language that is spoken from trying to get somebody who wants to be your friend, which I think is what Griffin projected a lot, though he used the word family, to somebody who says, I want to be your boss. I want to get to know you, but you're going to do this on my terms. And I think Griffin was trying to establish co-equal terms. And Dumars is saying, I'm the boss. And this is how it's going to go. You can be a part of this or you can choose not to. No hard feelings either way. But I'm the boss. And this is how it's going to go. And I think that the big theme today for Joe Dumars was the word communication. And of course, as somebody who has made his living in communication, that's something that you want to hear, that you want to understand. How do you communicate? What is your level of communication with the people around you? And who do you prioritize communications with? And one of the interesting things that Joe Dumars really talked about today was his relationship with the coaching staff, that he's already met with the entire coaching staff, as a group, that he has given them the expectations of competing daily. And these are broad expectations. And general managers, vice presidents, whomever, they usually don't come out and say they have a record that they want to see, because that's too much direct accountability. Shout out to Eric in the chat. Too much direct accountability. I think when you talk about a record, if you say we expect to win 45 games, you win 41, then people hold that against you. When you say you expect to compete night in and night out, I think that's the baseline for any NBA team. Now you can say, and he drew the comparison to other teams and said, if you see a champion, they compete every night. Well, I see teams that don't win championships that compete every night. That has to be the minimum. I wish there had been, I guess, some determination or statement, I guess, that we will make the playoffs this season from Joe Dumars. If he had said, we're going to make the playoffs this season. Now he says, and this is in relation to the trade that was made for Derek Queen. He said, we're not putting the expectation. We're not saying we're going to win this many games. We're not saying that we have to make the playoffs. We're not saying this, and this are the expectations. We want to start with playing hard every night, and we want to build from there, because this is not a one-year process. This is a multi-year process. And I get that and I accept that. But when you say that the trade has no impact on how you view this season, I would say that's optimistic, not realistic. Because that trade for Derek Queen will have an impact on this season. That trade for Derek Queen will have an impact on next season. The trade itself, not just the player, the trade itself. So to kind of dismiss those and say, hey, we're just trying to build a deep team, which I get that. You are trying to build a deep team. But did you make a short-term sacrifice for long-term gains? That could be the case. But to not address those, I think that was a miss as far as a follow-up question. Because I think, we didn't get to talk to Joe a lot about the trade, because the ramifications of it, we really didn't get to get in a whole bunch of details of the ramifications of the trade. Now that it's getting into the season, I think that we need to just think about those things, because it will hang over this season throughout its entirety. How Derek Queen plays, the record of the Pelicans, all those things will be tossed back into the Pelicans' faces throughout the season. If there's any success, if there's any failure, it's all going to come back over and over again, right? So I think that to just dismiss that out of pocket is a little bit unrealistic. But what you do see is Joe Dumars' commitment to depth. And I think you have a lot of positional depth as far as the number of players. We'll see what the quality of that is. But I was doing something interesting. We'll come back to Joe Dumars in just a second. But I was looking at something. When you talk about the depth of this team, and I was just looking at the spending of the way this goes. So you got your five positions: point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward center. 41% of the Pelicans spending for this season is going to the point guard position. More than almost $75 million going to the point guard position for the Pelicans this year. So you've got, and for now, Jordan Poole is put in that group because DeJounte Murray being sidelined. So both of those salaries go in there. So that's more than 60 million of that goes right there to those two guys. That's a lot of money in that position. Nobody on the rest of these gets higher than 22.6%. And that's the power forward position, which is manned by Zion Williamson. Trey Murphy makes up the majority of money at the shooting guard position, where the Pelicans have invested $30.9 million, which is just under 17% of their total salary allocations. At the small forward position, $20 million. That's where Herb Jones has been slotted so far. So at $20 million at the small forward position, $10.9 million, 10.9% of the budget overall. And at the center position, the smallest allocation, $16.65 million approximately. And that's just over 9% of the Pelicans' total salary allocations for this season, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $184 million. So when you add all those things up, Dumars has built a team that has positional depth as far as the number of players, but we'll see if they all complement each other skill-wise. That's what training camp and the season are for. We'll find those things out. But I think one of the good things that comes out of this, and that is a vestige of the David Griffin era, and Joe Dumars talked about this well, is the trip to Australia. And the opportunity for this to be a tremendous bonding opportunity for the New Orleans Pelicans. It's a long flight to Australia. They'll be isolated basically amongst the NBA themselves, and they'll do a couple of events and things like that. But they'll be by themselves for the most part in Australia, amongst, getting to know each other, practicing regularly. This is a big opportunity for the Pelicans to get this chance to start a little bit earlier than other teams and to really get a chance to focus on who they are. We want to see them come back from Australia and see them ready to start putting the pedal to the metal as they get build towards the regular season opener. And I think that as you look at this team, the other things that you're looking for out of from Joe Dumars' perspective is who's going to step forward, because as he preached team collective responsibility and team accountability, it seems as if there's a real push by Zion and Trey to take that step. And it seems from the conversations that Dumars was relaying to the press that Trey has actually been a little bit more proactive in assuming leaderships. It seems as if Trey is the one who's in Joe Dumars' office on a regular basis, going in there and asking about what it takes to be great. Joe says that Trey has shown up and said, what do I need to do? How do I get to the next level? How do I become what you were, which was a multiple time All-Star, which was a multi-time All-NBA candidate and a future Hall of Famer and a champion? So all those things, how did that happen? Trey wants to find out. And those are subtle things. It's not that their games are going to translate. He's not going to ask Joe Dumars, how do you play the same position at 6'9" that Joe did at 6'4"? It's about the mentality every day. It's about the subtle things of the game. It's about how do you lead your team on a night-to-night basis and have them look to you in those moments when they need clarity, when they need guidance, when they need to believe in somebody. Because there are nights when simply all you have as a basketball team is we've got that guy that we believe in and that you are scared of as an opponent. And Trey Murphy seemingly wants to be that guy. And I think that that's an important revelation that Joe Dumars says that Trey is right there in his office on a consistent basis. He didn't mention anybody else but Trey and Zion as far as like these, and Jeremiah Fears as well. Jeremiah Fears is another guy that Joe talked about a lot as far as just having these conversations. And I'm sure Derek Queen has had them as well. Young players want to get as much information as possible, and that's a good thing. But I think when you talk about the establishment, the guys who have been here, the guys who have put time in on the court, who have NBA careers, for Trey Murphy to still to know that that there are multiple other levels for him to reach, because you go from good player to all-star to all-NBA to MVP. That's the levels to this. Does Trey get to the MVP level? I don't know. Does he get to all-star? I don't know. Does he get to all-NBA? I don't know. But he is showing the commitment to those responsibilities. The other part of this, the big thing, I guess, would be Joe Dumars' relationship with Willie Green. And we didn't get a lot of information regarding play style for the Pelicans. We didn't get if there was going to be a change in approach. We didn't get a lot of questions about, the offense or the defensive schemes. Those will be questions for Willie Green tomorrow at Media Day. But he did again reveal that he and Willie have daily conversations, that Willie observes the guys scrimmaging. They talk about which plays, which situations may be beneficial to guys, and those things. And I think we expected that. There's two guys Willie from the Detroit area. Joe lived in the Detroit area, worked in the Detroit area for a number of years. There's a familiarity there. They've said that they've known each other for a long time. So there is a level of familiarity. There is a desire for Willie to do well. I think Pelicans fans want Willie to do well. They always have. It's just, can he adapt? And I think it's fine to have a good relationship with him. You want good relationships with your head coach and your front office. They have to be aligned. We've talked about that throughout the summer. Alignment in organizational purpose, alignment in personnel, alignment up and down the board. Can you get that here? And the concern to me is the personal relationship will outpace the professional accountability. That's the concern. I can't say for sure that it would happen. Again, I'm based on Joe Dumars' track record. He has not been somebody who's hung on to coaches when he feels that their time is done. For the Pelicans, you wonder, what does that mean for Willie Green? And what does that mean for Pelicans fans? Is there, and I wish somebody had asked this question today, is there a point in this season where you have to say, we've gone too far? This is not acceptable. Is there any point where the record and the point of the season where you are would determine that you need to make a coaching change? Because if we're talking about long-term growth, and that's what Joe is emphasizing today, is that this is not just about this year, this is about years down the road. What are you trying to determine with Willie Green? What is it that you see for the future? Are you seeing a coach that is improving, who could be the head coach for a championship team? Are you seeing somebody who's affable enough for you to like them and that you don't want to get rid of them? Are you seeing somebody that is just, unfortunately, not an NBA head coach, maybe better suited as an assistant? And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think generally Pelicans fans have been very forgiving as far as it goes with Willie Green. And the frustration is that he has not met them halfway. And people can say that the injuries and all those things that have sidetracked the seasons, certainly, yes, they have had their impact. But you see the loose threads in the garment, regardless of injuries. You see the strategic problems. You see the adaptability questions. You see the game management questions that come with the Willie Green. So you wonder how closely tied these folks are. And then it also makes you wonder about the influence of Troy Weaver, because Troy has no such allegiance to Willie Green. And Troy has clearly been in Joe Dumars' ear on a regular basis. Joe talked about the Jordan Poole trade and that it was Troy Weaver who broached the idea with him. Said, what do you think about Jordan Poole? Joe said, I ain't really thought that much about it. What do you think? He says, I think you'd like him. So if that was the sale, then that tells you, and I mean, that's obviously the Cliff Notes version of this, but clearly Troy Weaver is an aggressive person when it comes to getting his opinion out there. So if that's the case, how long before Troy Weaver says, it's time we move on from Willie? That's going to be something that we should watch this season. And the relationship between Willie and Troy Weaver may be more important than the relationship between Joe and Willie Green. That could be a big factor in what happens. The other part, we talked about communication with Joe Dumars. Joe Dumars is that he says on-court communication is organic, which I agree with. And then he made the point, off-court communication is intentional. Okay, you have to make sure that you are communicating off the court, that when guys leave the building, that when guys are not in basketball situations, that there's still a level of communication that exists between management, the players, and the coaches. That those lines of communications remain open. Another question that I thought was a good question today was Joe was asked about, said players change, times change, style of play changes. But ultimately, Joe Dumars says the elements of winning a championship remain the same, and they do. They do. We've done the stats plenty. The elements remain the same. Can you defend? Yeah. That's going to be, championship team's got to be able to defend. Can you score? Can you take care of the basketball? Can you rebound? Do you not turn it over? Those things don't change, right? Those things do not change. Winners have to do all those things. And if we look at the Pelicans over any of those years, including the 49-win season, that again only puts you 8th in the West. When you look at all those things, all those factors lined up, one of those, the Pelicans, at least one, every season the Pelicans have failed at. You have to have all those pillars in order to be a championship-worthy team. And the Pelicans have not been able to put all those together. We'll see if that happens this year, but you have some questions with turnovers. Jordan Poole, turnovers. Jeremiah Fears, turnovers. Zion Williamson at times has some turnovers. Trey Murphy is going to be pressured to put the basketball on the floor a lot more. Does he have turnovers? The second unit, Jordan Hawkins. Turnovers to me, turnovers and rebounding are still the two biggest questions as we get into the season. And I think on media day, you'd like to see a lot of questions of the backcourt of Zion and of Willie about how are you going to take care of the basketball? And does this style of play lend itself to guys taking care of the basketball? And if you're going to run, you got to be able to rebound. Where are your rebounders going to be? How do you play them in a way that you can get the ball off the boards but not compromise your offensive production? Can you do that on a consistent basis? Those are going to be the big style of play questions that you're worried about. Of course, everybody's going to ask about health. But what can you ask? I mean, are you planning on staying healthy this year? Everybody's planning on staying healthy. So that question, let's just throw that one out. What did you work on this offseason? What did you have to get better at? How do you become a better teammate? How do you become a better player? How do you affect winning? If we're not asking those questions, then we're wasting time. If we're asking guys about how they feel, if we're asking guys if everybody's going to give you the same answers. We want to compete. We want to win a championship. We want to do this. Those answers are the same. Let's get the personal accountability questions like Joe Dumars has said. If it's accountability and responsibility, how every one of those players, everyone who sits on that dais tomorrow, who comes to the podium, every one of them should be asked, how are you taking personal responsibility for your game and your team? And how are you going to hold yourself and your teammates accountable for success? What is your relationship like with the head coach? And do you feel there's an open door of communication? Do you feel like you've gotten the input on the offense that, to really get the best out of this team? Defensively, what adjustments have you already seen to what the Pelicans did last year? Let's get specific when we ask these questions. I don't want generalizations. I don't want to know how you feel. I don't want to know if you like this group of guys. I don't want to know all that stuff because I know what the answers are going to be. Nobody's going to come up there and say, I don't want to play with this guy. Nobody's going to go up there and say, this guy's garbage. Nobody's going to do that. So tell me, how are you better? How are you better? And how are you going to make your teammates better? And what do you expect this year to be drastically different from what we've seen in 5 previous seasons? What is going to be different this year? Because if there's no discernible difference, if it's just we're just fine-tuning what we did, then you are the same team. You can put new numbers on the back of the jerseys. You can put new names. You can have all that. But if nobody has any idea of how they got better and what they're going to do and what their roles and responsibilities are on day one, that should already be communicated. That part, when you show up for camp, you should already know what you're going to be doing. You shouldn't find out on day one of camp. This is stuff that should have been communicated throughout the offseason. So what do you want to see from these players? Do you want them to take ownership of this? Do you want them to, or do you want them to come out? If players are come out and saying, I'm trying to get my numbers this year or whatever, this is what I want to do. It ain't about your numbers. It ain't about your numbers. Go look at those Thunder numbers from last year. Outside of Shea and Jalen Williams, who got numbers? You know what I'm saying? Chet had good numbers, but they weren't MVP numbers. Get the numbers that you're supposed to get because the team is winning. Winning gets you everything. When the Pistons had 4 starters at the All-Star game, when the Hawks did it, it wasn't about the numbers, it was about the winning, right? Those are teams that went on to win 60 games. They didn't win, obviously, they didn't win championships. I mean, the Pistons did, but I mean, like, the Hawks didn't win a championship, but what you got was a reward for winning. All these guys that want to get paid, win some games. Jordan Hawkins, you want to stay in the league, contribute to winning. Even Misa, you want to guarantee that you're going to be a starter for the next few years, contribute to winning every night. The numbers will take care of themselves. Because on a night-to-night basis, that's why we keep averages. That shows what you consistently do. But the numbers will change from night-to-night basis based on the opponent. Can you be adaptable? Those are the things that you want to see out of the Pelicans as we get into this conversation. Do you feel like you can adapt on a night-to-night basis defensively? And then offensively, do you have the kind of scheme that's going to put pressure on teams every night and make them adapt to you? Far too often when teams play the Pelicans, they have not had to adjust who they are. The Pelicans do the same things every night, and teams find them easy to stop, easy to handle. If you are not going to be the kind of team that somebody's got to deal with, if you just team that they got to play, then you got no chance. People have to think about, how are we going to take care of this team? How are we going to defend this team? Because right now the thought is, how do we take care of Zion when he does play? The rest of these guys are going to fold, or they don't have to, or they're not going to get the support that they need from the game plan or from the coaching or whatever. That's the impression that there is around the league. So how do you change that? And the only way to do that is being the kind of team that makes things happen and not the kind of team that lets things happen. And for the past 4 years, the Pelicans have been even, I don't care when over the course of the season, there have been moments when they've been the type of team to put their imprint on the other opponent. There have been times, but there's not been the kind of consistency from a month-to-month basis, from a week-to-week basis in winning. One of the other final big differences between David Griffin and Joe Dumars was Griff used to talk about the 10-game segments of the season, how he judged those in 10 games. Well, one thing Joe Dumars says, I ain't worried about that. He's worried about this game, the next game, and moving on from that, the 10-game segments. And we used to do the 10-game segments. I used to do that a lot at the Bird Rights, was kind of like figure out, okay, this is what you did over these 10, this is what you did over these 10. And there were never a lot of really, I mean, obviously when you looked at it, there weren't a lot of great 10-game stretches. A couple of times you get your 7 and 3s, a couple of times you get your 8 and 2s, but they weren't, you never got a 10 and 0. And so I think that for Joe, the thing is, I want you to be great every night, and we'll get to the other part. That's a player's thought, certainly. Short memory, good game, bad game, short memory, erase it. We got to play again tomorrow or the next day. So I think that that's the difference when you talk about from somebody who's been a career executive and for somebody who's a player who transitioned into the front office. That's one of those things, that mindset of we're going to focus on today. Because that's where players have to live. They have to live in the today. If you got your brain halfway on the next game, or you're thinking about last night's game where you only shot this percentage, you can't get over it, you can't let it go, you're going to have problems there. So overall, my final thoughts would be that I think that Joe Dumars at this stage has a really good grasp of what he wants from the Pelicans. I think he has put together the roster that he wanted. And I think this is ultimately an experiment, as they are every season. But for Joe, the experiment is about finding out who is going to step up. That's what this is designed to do. This is designed to determine who the true franchise player is. If Zion cannot meet the expectations that Joe has placed for him, he won't be here. If Trey steps into that role, Joe will embrace it. But this season, more than anything, because without that expectation of we have to, like with him not saying we have to make the playoffs this season, he's trying to find out what he has. He has put this intentionally to put the burden on two guys, Trey and Zion, to figure out if they're the ultimately the tent poles you want to use to support this whole thing. That's what this is about. Because it ain't about Fears and Queen yet. They're too young. They're not ready. It ain't about them. This is about Zion and Trey. That's what this is absolutely about. He's made his judgment on Herb Jones. Come to the same judgment everybody else got. Herb Jones is the ultimate professional. He's going to help you win. He's being paid a reasonable salary. Zion and Trey, because he wants to see if Trey can be a true number one. And if you got two number ones, if you got two guys who can be your number one on a nightly basis, you got something in the NBA. If the eras of the big threes may be over, but you got to have two legitimate stars at the very least to win a championship. And he wants to see if Trey is going to be that and if Zion is going to live up to his responsibilities. If those two things happen, however the course of the season goes, Joe Dumars is going to be happy, in my opinion. Now, we'll see what happens with the coaching. We'll see what happens with injuries. We'll see all that. Those are things we can't control. Right? But what we do want to see is, I think the ultimate judgment is, how does Zion perform consistently and how does Trey take that next step up? Where does that leave him? Where does that put him in the hierarchy of NBA stars? All right. Again, I will not be at Media Day tomorrow because I have not been credentialed for this season because of working with Boot Crew Media. And I think that, again, it's disappointing. I'm really disappointed. It's the first time in a decade that I won't be part of it. And I think we wanted to hold fast. And I think it's important to stand up for stuff sometimes, you know. I don't want to have an adversarial relationship with the Pelicans, and that's not what this is about. I'm not trying to be angry at anybody, but it's disappointing. It's really disappointing. I think it's a loss ultimately for the fans, and I think it's a loss ultimately for the media who cover the Pelicans. I'm not here to say that I'm number one and I'm the best and everybody should make sure that I'm in there, but I think that I've done my job and I think I've done it well. And I think I deserved and have earned my spot in the media pool. It's disappointing. Again, it's disappointing. So, but that's not going to stop the show. We're going to keep going, keep doing what we do. We'll see if things change. If they do, great. If not, it is what it is. But I appreciate y'all and I appreciate the support and I appreciate just you tuning in. I appreciate the messages I get on social media and under these podcasts each and every week. So thank you to y'all for sticking with me. And I thank, Justin and Ross for supporting me too. And so I have their backs, you know what I'm saying? Cause this impacts all of us. So they've got my back and they support me and I got their backs and I'm gonna support them, as our team. And that's what we're gonna do. So I'll be back tomorrow. We'll discuss Media Day as I watch it from a distance, and we'll get our reactions to that as well. In the meantime, go ahead and leave your questions below if you got any questions for me for tomorrow. I'll go ahead and answer those. Again, I'm just kind of frustrated right now, but yeah, go ahead and do that. You know how to follow me on social media at DM Grub on Instagram, Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, and TikTok as well. So until the next time, this has been the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. I'm me, you're you. See you tomorrow.